Hello everyone. Welcome to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and this press conference with this year's Nobel Laureates. I'm Göran Hansson, Secretary General of the Academy, and I will be your host for this hybrid event. In normal years, we would have a press conference with all our Nobel Laureates here at the Academy the day before the Nobel lectures. But everything is different in pandemic times. So for the second year in a row, we have a digital press conference. This year, at least, we have a handful of journalists in the room. Last year, all were participating via video links. We have three of this year's laureates who have graciously agreed to be with us on video links. Professor Klaus Hasselmann, Nobel Laureates in Physics, is with us from the Max Planck Gesellschaft and its Harnack House in Berlin. Professor David MacMillan, Nobel Laureate in Chemistry, is at the House of Sweden, the Swedish Embassy in Washington, D.C. Lovely plants there behind you, but it looks a bit windy. And finally, last but not least, Professor Guido Imbens, laureate in economic sciences, who is participating not from Stanford Business School, but actually from a hotel room in Washington, D.C., I gather. Gentlemen, congratulations again to your prizes, and thank you very much for being with us today and for agreeing to answer questions from the media. I'd like to extend a warm welcome also to all the journalists who are with us on video links, and particularly to those few who are here in the room today. We have requested that those who come to the Academy are vaccinated and have shown, I think you've shown vaccine passes. In case you get closer than 2 meters to each other, I would still recommend that you use face masks. And now, without further ado, it's time for questions. I think we have a question already from Associated Press, Seth Borenstein.
Yes, thank you very much for doing this. This is actually for all three of the Nobelists. Just in general, given climate change, the pandemic, violence, misinformation, famine out there, can you tell us what to you is the largest threat to society right now? What makes you worry the most? And conversely, what gives you the most hope right now?
That's a big question. Shall we start with the doyen of climate science, Professor Hasselmann?
I think our biggest concern is that people don't realize that we have a climate problem right now, and we have to react now to prevent major climate change in the future. So making people aware of the future danger today has always been a problem with us for about 20 or 30 years, and we're still fighting with it. And I'm personally very happy that the young people, the fighters of the future and so forth, have picked up the challenge and are getting across the message to the public that we have to react and respond to the problem. And so I'm much more optimistic than I was maybe 20 or 30 years ago that the young people will succeed in awakening the public to the demands of climate change.
Thank you, Professor Hasselmann. Who would like to continue? Professor MacMillan?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would probably echo a lot of what Professor Hasselmann said. I think climate change is something which is clearly going to have a large impact on society. But at the same time, given the science, given the call to arms among scientists, I really feel more optimism, and I feel like there's a real moment happening with scientists moving towards trying to solve this problem. I would bet on the fact that we would solve this. That's an easy thing to say at this moment. But at the same time, it's going to take an enormous amount of effort from the whole community.
Thank you. Also,
yeah, I also agree completely. When I talk to my children, they see climate change as the biggest problem facing us. And of course, there's a lot of things that come with it. All the disinformation makes it so much harder to address these issues. And it's clearly a very interdisciplinary thing where all the sciences have to come together to figure out what is going to be a way of moving society in the right direction. But I do agree that this is kind of the overarching problem.
Thank you very much, and I think that was clear answers to the question. Now we have a question from Reuters news agency, Johan Alander. At least we have his name on the screen. That's somewhat promising.
Roger, where are you?
It's so much easier when everybody's in the same room. Okay, we don't get connection with Reuters, so we'll move on to the Swedish broadsheet daily Dagens Nyheter and Maria Günther.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question to all the laureates. I would like to know what you donated to the Nobel Prize Museum and why.
Okay, we'll take a round of answers here. Professor Hasselmann?
I didn't quite understand it because the question is, why did we get the prize, or what is the question?
No, the Nobel Museum here in Stockholm always asks the Nobel laureates to donate something, ideally something that has to do with your research, your discoveries. Have you thought of that? Have you donated anything? And what was that in that case?
We donate to all sorts of things. My wife does the donation, so I'm not quite sure to what we have donated, but we do donate as much as we can to efforts to prevent climate change and respond to the challenge of climate change. Yeah. And I'm very happy that I have my wife who takes care of these things. But we do donate.
Yeah, yes. But I think the question was if you have given
forest program in Kenya.
What?
Yeah.
A lot will go to a reforest program.
A lot of our funds go to the deforestation program or reforestation program in Kenya.
In Kenya, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
and
wonderful.
And other things you take care of. Yeah.
I think the question was if you have given anything, any particular equipment or instrument or notebook to the Nobel Museum.
So maybe I can.
Please.
I don't think so. Do we have any equipment?
You're still thinking about it.
No.
Okay, we'll move on.
So I can
please
answer that question. So the work for which the award was given to me and Josh Angers really started when Josh and I were junior faculty at Harvard, and we would spend our Saturday mornings doing laundry in the local laundromat because we were both living in apartments close together that didn't have washing machines. So I was going to donate a packet of laundry detergent of the type we were using when we were having our discussions there.
That's a great story. David MacMillan, have you thought of this yet?
Yeah, I think my gift is equally bizarre, maybe. My group had a lot of fun. We take our science very seriously, but we don't take ourselves so seriously. And one of the things that my group does, which drives me crazy, is in almost every group photograph, they sneak in. It's basically the cap from a gas cylinder that has a face painted on it. And they always sneak it in, and it always drives me crazy. And even in my Nobel lecture, I found out afterwards they snuck it into that as well. So I will be donating that cap for that gas cylinder because I never want to see it again. So that's right.
Very good. Very good. We'll move on to China Radio. Chen Yufei Axelsson. You're on now.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
I think they can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much for giving me this chance. And I like to say congratulations to all of you. I always like to ask this question is that what kind of suggestions you like to give to the young people for their future development, to be focused or interested in the science from your experience, and also consider the current situation. I mean, digital and so advanced, and children focus too much on mobiles and videos. How can get them focused on the science?
Dr. MacMillan, you're the youngest of the three of you. Would you like to start answering that question?
Well, I can say that I've been universally unsuccessful in getting my 16-year-old daughter to get off of her iPhone, so I might be the wrong person to ask that question. But I would say, for the two things I think that sometimes we could do a better job of is reminding people that, what we do in the sciences and in other areas, it's incredible. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And sometimes we forget that. And I think reminding younger people that it's incredibly fun to do this. You can have such a great time and you can develop a lot of passion along the way. That's the part I think we should really spend more time sort of trying to communicate to young people.
Very good. Dr. Imbens?
Yeah, I agree with that. My kids are two of my kids are in a school in San Francisco where they're actually incredibly good at making the mathematics fun. And when you see how much of a difference that makes and how interested the kids get into the mathematics and the science, it's really amazing. And so I think we should put much more effort into helping the teachers kind of bring these topics alive and help them get the kids interested.
Very good. Dr. Hasselmann, you were quite enthusiastic about the younger generation.
Well, I'm very happy that the young people have picked up the problem of climate change much more strongly than we had in our times, and they are very active, go on the street and do things and do their best to follow a lifestyle which reduces their impact on climate change, and they're much more aware of the problems than we were. And so I personally am very optimistic that the young people have picked up the problem and are willing to respond to it and have the facilities nowadays to do this. So I myself am very optimistic that the young people will actually change the whole attitude that the public has to the climate problem.
Very good. Thank you. Now we move on to the Curie News Magazine, Nathalie van der Leer.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, but we see great. Maria Günther. That's also nice. Now we see Nathalie.
Now I see myself. So I have a question picking up a little bit on young people, but I'm thinking more about young scientists. I mean, it's a common conception that you should dare to do risky projects, risky science to make the big breakthroughs. But nowadays, young scholars are under a lot of pressure with short-term contracts, and they have a lot of pressure to publish and make their way through the scientific career. So how can you combine, how can you do risky projects in this climate? What is the opinion of the laureates?
Who would like to start on that one?
Well, I think all we need to do is to have more funds available for people that look into the problems of climate change and how we respond to it and how the public should respond to this. And I think the fact that, at least in Germany, there's a much stronger response of the public in general to the problem of climate change, and the young people are bringing this forward. I think this will give more support to the policymakers and the funders to give more money to investigate these questions. I myself am optimistic that the young people will bring the problem forwards and get it more into the public domain and the general discussion.
Now, climate change, although a huge problem, is reasonably well funded in terms of science. What about other areas of science? Dr. MacMillan, what's your thoughts on how to study important problems in this time of tough funding situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is a great question. I think one of the tricky parts with that question is I would argue that culturally in different parts of the world, people place different values on, for example, publication numbers versus doing bigger ideas, bigger picture parts. the one thing I would say is if you want people, especially young people, to do risky things, you have to make them feel secure and that it's acceptable to do risky things. And that's critical. And that comes back to agencies and cultures of agencies that fund or give resources to scientists and beyond. But you have to create an environment where it's secure to do risky things.
And now, if I may follow up on that one, both you and Dr. Imbens moved from Europe, from Scotland in your case, and from the Netherlands in Dr. Imbens' case, to the United States. Is the research climate better in the United States? Is it still better in the US?
Yeah, I'm not going to touch that question. No, I think it's, I mean, I can say from my point of view, I mean, the science that's going on all around the world right now, the way I look at it is there's so much innovation happening all over the world. It's sort of critical that for young people, though, that you have to give them the space to be able to do those sort of risky things. I moved to the USA because I love the NFL as well as loving soccer, so it's really not a lot to do with science. But ultimately, I think, you know, good science can happen anywhere in the world if people have the resources to do it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the decision to stay in the US after my PhD was partly because at that time, certainly the research climate was very good here. It was very important at that stage to have colleagues around me who were inspiring, were interesting to talk to. And so early on, having people like Josh Angris as my colleague was hugely important for me. But I do agree with David. This is actually a really important question. The tricky thing is that if you want to encourage people to take big risks, it also means there's going to be a lot of people failing in that. If they do risky projects, a lot of them are not going to work out. And that it is kind of difficult to see what the best structure is for setting that up. It's all good and well to say that we want to encourage these really big breakthroughs, but it does mean that there's going to be a lot of people doing work that in the end turns out not to be useful. And how what we do with people who spend a lot of time doing things that end up not being useful, but that ex ante may have been promising, that's not quite so clear. And it's certainly true that at the moment, the incentives for young researchers are first to get tenure. And that means they have a 6-7 year horizon and they need to do acceptable work at that time. And that doesn't necessarily agree with doing research that is impactful in the long run. In fact, I'd say even though I did the work for which I got the Nobel Prize as a junior faculty, I did not actually get tenure at Harvard with that work because it wasn't really recognized at that time. And that's, in some sense, that's totally fine. I ended up at a different place, and that's the system worked perfectly fine there. But setting up a system that really incentivizes things in the long run for society in terms of having the big impact research, that's very hard, because it means you'll have a lot of people doing things that are not impactful as well.
If you stay in Europe, it seems the Max Planck Institute would be a good place. We have 2 Nobel laureates from Max Planck institutes this year, and we had 2 last year. We have another question, Marlene Sellebråten from realtid.se. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. First of all, congratulations to all of you, obviously. I have a question about the changing role of maybe scientific community and fundamental research with the advance of all data-driven models and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I was just wondering, what's your take on that? How do you see the role of researchers and scientific research changing due to that? And what was the implication for? I'm going back to the question before on incentives for students to become researchers.
Okay, shall we start with the big data and the new times in science? Who would like to start with commenting on that one?
Sure, I'll be happy to go first there. So there's an article in The Economist actually a couple of weeks ago about the way research in economics is changing, that it's become much more like some of the other sciences in having big labs and researchers working together in very big teams. In fact, so it mentioned Raj Chetty at Harvard, who has a team of 25 researchers working with him, and Susan Athey at Stanford, kind of as a big team. And that's very different from the way economics used to be, where people would work together in much smaller groups. And that does create complications. That does make it more difficult for junior researchers, because clearly people can't immediately set up a lab of that type coming out of graduate school. And so it puts a much bigger premium on being at a well-resourced place. And exactly how that's going to impact research long term isn't very clear. But I hope that there's room for different models there. And personally, I work kind of in a much smaller groups. And sometimes I work actually with both Chetty and Athey. And I think the diversity there is very helpful, because if it became just the big lab model, I think that would leave economics a poor discipline for it.
Dr. Hasselmann.
It's creating a lot of opportunities, but I think we need to allow for a lot of diversity there.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hasselmann, you wanted to comment?
Well, I think you need two types of research. The Max Planck Society has the policy that they have certain institutions, or most of the institutions, are based on the individual scientists who decide to do their own science the way they think is most appropriate, independent of any immediate application for society, but just for general understanding of science as a whole. And they leave it up to the director entirely to decide what to do. And I myself worked on abstract problems of climate change without any immediate applications, but then the applications came out automatically. And at the same time, the sort of more basic research that we do in the Max Planck Society stimulates other research institutions to pick these up and actually development to the point of application. So I think you need a combination of independent basic research, which is not geared to any immediately economic gain, and other institutions that try to translate the inner science to the basic science brings into applications that will benefit society as a whole. So I think you need a combination of these two types of science, which I think the Max Planck Society and other institutions that work together with the Max Planck Society have found quite a good combination for doing this. And I myself profited from this option of being able to do basic research and then getting into applied research as it interests me later on. So this separation of basic research and applied research, I think, is a good structure that one should try to introduce in the climate support.
Thank you. We'll move on to the TT News Agency and Joachim Goxer. Yes.
Yeah. You hear me?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Congratulations to all three laureates. And I would like to ask first, when you look at the development in the pandemic, what do you three see ahead of you? When are we out of this more acute phase economically and from your different perspectives? If you can give me a little picture of that. And if I could also add, do you regret not coming to Stockholm to pick up the prize?
Why don't we start with a second question? It's much easier to answer.
Yeah.
Dr. MacMillan?
Oh, I'm massively I really wish I could come to Stockholm. Stockholm is obviously a fantastic city, but just reading about and learning about the ceremony and getting to meet all the people and what an amazing ceremony the whole thing is, and hopefully next year we'll be able to do it. So yeah, I'm missing out on that enormously. I would love to go over there. On the pandemic front, I would just say I'm clearly not an expert, but we have done some work in the COVID area. But I would say that I think the world is slowly beginning to realize that it's endemic, which at first sounds very depressing, but ultimately I think it becomes, you move into the phase of learning to live with and using science to live with it to get quickly back to normality. So that's, I think, roughly where we're headed.
Dr. Imbens, your thoughts?
Yeah, on the on the easy question, again, yes, I very much regret not being able to come to Stockholm this winter. I visited there before. I would have loved to have been there this December. On the COVID stuff and how we're going to get out of it, or where we're going to go. Again, I'm like David, I'm not an expert on that. The misinformation and the difficulty in societies in actually coming together and agreeing on policies seems a particularly big problem. And it's striking to me how when I grew up in the Netherlands, how it seemed so easy to get agreement on the use of vaccines, kind of in the case of polio. But there was in fact some disagreement. There were some groups that for religious reasons didn't want to have a polio vaccine, but there was this general agreement in the population that this was something we needed to do, and that some individual liberties had to be put aside for the time being. And that here we don't seem to have found a way of making these decisions that we can all live with, and that's clearly made it much harder to deal with the pandemic. And as long as that continues, it's going to be very hard to really find a good way of living with this.
Yes. Now we have a few more minutes until we have to round off and go to individual interviews. Carl-Johan von Seth of the Dagens Nyheter newspaper. You'll get a microphone here. One of the few brave who came to the Academy building.
Yeah, my question is mainly for Professor Imbens, but maybe the other laureates can comment on this as well. You co-wrote a piece a few years ago in Nature arguing that the term statistical significance should be redefined in order to raise the bar for science. Do you think science in general has a problem with false discoveries?
Dr. Imbens?
Yeah. I mean, I've sort of written a couple of things on that. I mean, the use of statistical significance is a very funny thing. I mean, this goes back to the 1920s and the work by Fisher and Neyman, and it was designed for a very different set of questions. When Fisher proposed using a standard of statistical significance associated with 5%, that was not thought through particularly well, and there certainly was no evidence that this was intended to be a very general recommendation. But somehow it's caught on, and that's understandable because it's very easy. It's very nice to have standards and have people kind of use the same standards and use the same language, but it's being applied in settings that it was never intended for, in a way that's led to a lot of false discoveries, and so we need to be more flexible there and find different ways of evaluating evidence. And there's lots of places where that's true. It's the way in the US the Food and Drug Administration does their drug approval. It's in the way experiments are being run in economics, how we use the evidence there. But insisting on this one size fits all definition of statistical significance is really not very effective and appropriate. In physics, of course, for the discovery of new particles, they use very different standards, and that's exactly the right thing. We shouldn't be using the same evidence irrespective of what the cost and benefits of the things we're evaluating are.
One size does not fit all. Do you have any additional comments, Dr. MacMillan, Dr. Hasselmann, before we close this part of the press conference?
Well, I think in the area of climate research, we don't have much problems. We have a few people that deny the existence of climate change, but they're such a minority, and so nobody really takes them seriously. And I think the information that we as scientists have provided to the media and the public regarding climate change has normally been accepted and understood, and there's not been much discussion or dissent on how we bring this across the public. So I myself am rather optimistic from the point of view of climate change and the impact of climate on the public and on the economy as a whole. I think we've had done a good job of bringing this across the public, and I don't see great problems in the communication between climate scientists and the public and the media in this respect.
Okay, shall we? On that optimistic note, it's time to close this press conference. Thank you very much for being with us from Berlin and Washington. And now I know that there will be individual interviews. So I'll stop here and thank you again for your interest.